Hi everyone, my name is Jon Klassen, and I am the author and the illustrator of this book called The Rock from the Sky, which is out this year from Caldecott Press. It is my fourth picture book that I've done myself. I've illustrated more than that for other people, but on my own, this is my fourth one. My first book was called, I want my hat back. My second book was called This Is Not My Hat, and the third book was called We Found a Hat, about two turtles who find a hat. So we're breaking a bit of a theme here, although the characters are wearing hats, and I'm not gonna lie, it did help as soon as I put those on them. I was gonna try and be classy and sort of different and take the hats off of them this round and be like, I can do without the hats. But then like halfway through the illustrating, maybe even the writing, the roughing out of the thing, I put these hats on them, and it just helped a lot. I think I'm just comfortable with them on. But I think what we should do is probably read a story from this book. There are 5 little stories in this book, but they're sort of interconnected. But I'll read the first one, so we sort of have some idea of what we're talking about in case you haven't seen the book or bought it or anything. You should probably do both of those things, though. So, The Rock from the Sky. The first story in this book is the longest one, and it's called The Rock, and it starts with a little flower at the bottom of the page. Here's a turtle, and he says, I like standing in this spot. It is my favorite spot to stand. I don't ever want to stand anywhere else. And there's a giant rock falling somewhere above him through the sky. I think we're going to call this guy like a mole. He's I don't know what he is, but we can call him a mole. And he comes out of the edge here and he says, hello. And the turtle says, hello. He says, what are you doing? And the turtle says, I am standing in my favorite spot. Come, stand in it with me. Okay. So now they're both standing in the spot. And the turtle says, what do you think of my spot? And the mole says, actually, I have a bad feeling about it. And the turtle says, a bad feeling? And the mole says, yes. The mole points to a spot way over in the corner, and he says, there is another spot over there. Do you see it? And the turtle says, yes, I see it. And the mole says, I will go and stand in it to see if it feels better than this spot. And so he goes and stands in it, and the turtle is still at his old spot. And they're far enough away that they have to shout now, and the turtle says, how does that spot feel? And the mole says, I cannot hear you. You are too far away. I am going to come back. Still the rock, still somewhere falling. So the mole has come back, and the turtle says, does this spot still feel bad? And the mole says, yes, it feels even worse than before. I am going back to the other spot. Do you want to come with me? And the turtle says, no, I will stay here. This is my favorite spot. Are you sure? Yes. So the mole goes back to his spot far away, and the turtle stays where he is. And then a snake comes out to visit the mole, or at least he shows up. Snake doesn't say anything in this book. He shows up a few times and doesn't say anything. But the mole says, oh, hello. I am standing in this spot by myself. Come, stand in it with me. So the turtle sees them both standing over there, and he says, my spot is better. And the mole says, you are too far away to hear. So the turtle starts to come closer, and he says, I am coming closer. And the mole says, we still cannot hear you. And the turtle makes it all the way over there, and he says, I said my spot is better. And then a giant rock lands on his spot. And that's the end of that first story. So just to give some sort of history on this, the book itself, it took a weird kind of long time to write this one, just because a couple of these stories, including that first one, were floating around for a while. The third book, We Found a Hat, the third hat book, had The Rock from the Sky in it at one point, in a draft. And then it also had a sunset story, which it still does, but it had a sunset story from Rock from the Sky in it. And then it had a very condensed version of the current story of We Found a Hat, with two turtles sort of finding a hat in the night, and then one of them almost stealing it, but then deciding not to. And I brought that to Candlewick, and they said, you know, this third story is really the whole book. It feels like you could get a whole book out of that one, and it feels more in keeping with this whatever this hat series has become. And they were right. I think that I like this book very much now in that new version, and I think it does suit the series. But when it was over, we had sort of finished this trilogy of hat books that I had, you know, eventually decided I was going to try and do after the first two were done. And it felt like I was kind of like nervous, I guess. The three hat books had become sort of their own thing by then. And I was very happy about that. It's what you would want as an author, is for your books to go out into the world and become their own little guys. But I also, I didn't know what to do after that. I had sort of figured out this weird little device with these hats, and it was done as far as I was concerned. I kind of wanted to try something else. But I had that weird rock story still, and I had that sunset story, but that wasn't really a book to my mind. The one that we just read didn't justify a whole book to me. But then the more I thought about it, these two characters, if you haven't read it, I Want My Hat Back, these two characters are in I Want My Hat Back. They're just bit players. They're like one-page characters who are there and gone. But in my head, I liked the idea of these guys sort of putting on, after the big show was over, which I sort of in my head had felt like these hat books had become. I liked the idea of these guys kind of sneaking out onto the stage for whoever was left and putting on dumb little comedy sketches for people who were probably asleep or something. And that's sort of the tone that first story has. It's like a gag. It's like a weird little comedy short. And so the tone of that, along with bowler hats, which they eventually put on, that sort of, yeah, little dumb comedy sketches really sort of helped me write the other ones and figure out the book and kind of find a home for that rock story, and then expand on it for 4 other stories that I think sort of, I don't know, a lot of the reviews are saying it's a pretty weird book, and I don't disagree, but it does feel like it arcs in a more conventional way now. It feels like it has a beginning, something of a middle, and definitely an end. In working on the cover for the book, it's the only place, if you look on the interiors, it's one of the main reasons I wanted to make this book is because I wanted a big spread of a giant rock. I like drawing rocks, and I increasingly like things that kids can draw, and kids can draw a rock. They can always draw a rock, and so I really wanted spreads with just a big rock in the sky. What I didn't want was what I had to do later and put tiny little pebbles trailing the rock to make sure we know that it's falling. The more I flipped through the book, even when I was roughing it out, I was like, for very little kids, they might think that rock is just floating up there, and that's not what we want. We need to know that it's falling. But for the back cover, I got to do a rock without pebbles, and so I really liked the back cover. And then the front, usually I think all my covers that I've done myself have characters looking straight at the audience, sort of as if they're addressing them. But in this one, the two of them were looking straight at the audience at one point, and then I had the mole, I finally changed it. I broke the rule a little bit and had him look up to where the rock is coming. Even though the mole doesn't really know about the rock, he has an intuition about it, so it didn't seem inappropriate for him to look up. So that's the story of this cover. It's just a ton of negative space with the sort of expectant negative space, I guess, with the mole looking up. We can read one more story from it, and then I can talk a little bit more about other things. I'm going to read one called The Future, which is the third story. I think it's the third story in the book. Yeah. I had a memory about when I was a kid in Canada at school. Whenever it would snow in the night, they would plow the schoolyard into a big mountain of snow so that you could park there and stuff. The parking lots would all get plowed and stuff. And it made this huge mountain, and it was this huge geographic feature that just showed up overnight in your schoolyard, that you were, like a place you were really used to, all of a sudden it changed. And of course, the first thing you wanted to do when you were a kid, when you saw a giant thing in your playground, was climb it And so we all just spent the day climbing those things. And so the idea of sort of interacting with the thing and sitting on it and sleeping against it and making it a part of your day-to-day, adapting to it, really, I wanted that to be sort of what the book became about, is sort of like, how do we go about our days when giant rocks fall in them sometimes? Like, how do we adapt to that and still have weird little arguments with our friends and stuff when at any moment a giant rock can fall on us? So in this book, in this story anyway, it starts with the two of them sitting on top of the rock. And the mole has his eyes closed. And the turtle is looking at him and saying, "What are you doing?" And the mole says, "I like to close my eyes and imagine into the future." And the turtle says, "Are you doing it right now?" And the mole says, "Yes. Come, close your eyes and do it with me." And so they both close their eyes, and it sort of goes wider, and you begin to see little plants and grasses growing out of the ground. And the mole says, in the future, this spot will look different. New things will grow." And now the plants are getting bigger and there's trees. "New plants and trees will come. A whole forest, maybe." And they've still got their eyes closed on top of the rock. The turtle says, "It is nice here." And the mole says, "Yes, it is." And then this like alien thing walks out from somewhere in the woods, and the turtle says, "Wait, what is that? Does something live here?" And the mole says, "Maybe. I don't know." And the thing sees a flower and gets kind of excited about it, or something's going on anyway. It definitely is registering that flower. And the turtle says, "What is it?" And the mole says, "We are in the future. I don't know what it is." And the turtle says, "What is it doing?" And the mole says, "Shh, it will hear you." And then the alien thing blasts the flower with some sort of fiery death ray from its eye and fries it to bits. And the turtle starts screaming and he goes, "Ah!" And the mole says, "Shh." And then the thing's finished frying the flower and it's just there in a heap of ashes, and it walks away. And the turtle is still screaming, "Ah!" And the mole says, okay, I think it's going. Okay, it's gone. And the turtle says, "I don't want to imagine into the future with you anymore." And that's the end of the future story. That alien thing does come back later in the book, and we have to sort of deal with him because now he's sort of out in the world, now that they've sort of dreamt him into existence. But that sort of dreaming at the same time as another person, them sort of both closing their eyes and dreaming or imagining or whatever it is they're doing, that happens at the end of We Found a Hat a little bit too. These two characters sort of sharing a dream, and sort of in the book anyway, and in this one, sort of not really defining what the rules are there. Are they in one another's dream? Is this a new place now that they both kind of made? Is that alien real or anything? There's something about communal dreaming that I got really interested in after I started making picture books, and especially after these first two hat books sort of went around and took me around with them, was that I ended up getting into a lot of conversations, both with kids and with grown-ups, about things that were in the books that I certainly related to and felt like they were reasons I was interested in them, but things I hadn't explicitly put in the books, little memories or little associations, not even anything you really talk about. Just, you can tell when someone is bringing it up because you can't really say what it is. There's a feeling that you can get from a book or a song or something like that that is shared, but it isn't really easy to nail down. You wouldn't write it explicitly. And I was so surprised every time it happened that people would bring up sort of what it had reminded them of, or why they had liked the book in a really personal sort of way. And it was really affecting. I don't think that I had believed in that kind of a thing before I made those first two books, especially. I think I thought that storytelling was about really clearly stating something, and it is. You have to really be clear about where it is your characters are and what's going on. But a lot of what makes a book, or any of that kind of thing, special, at least to me, that somebody else makes, is sort of that indescribable thing, that sort of weird connection that you make with it for reasons that you think are completely your own, but that are often really communal. And the idea of communally sort of dreaming, and this idea that, you know, our reactions to stories and books feel intensely personal, and they are intensely personal, even for kids. Excuse me. but that they can also, that doesn't mean that they also can't be other people's reactions to these things. They can't actually be common ground, even though they feel like your very own. There is common ground there too. And this book isn't about that necessarily. I think that story is a little bit about that. This book is about a giant rock falling on you and then another giant rock falling on an alien at the end of the book. But I wanted to talk about that feeling because I think it got more important to me just in my sort of why I like to make these books and sort of the spirit of feeling like you're connected to people, especially, you know, this year, but all the time. It's a great reason to make this stuff, and it's especially fun with kids because it is hard to connect with kids as a grown-up. You know, you want to be the kind of grown-up who really knows how to talk to kids and make books for them and stuff. But when you get out there, it really is, you know, there are differences. You forget what it's like to be a kid a lot of times. And so finding out that they're connecting to the same things that made you laugh even about this kind of a story has been really rewarding, and I feel very lucky to get to do it. This book, I hope they like it. It's definitely a weird one, but fingers crossed, and I hope you like it too. Thanks very much for listening.